Can you give us an overview of your 4-act story structure?
So one of my favorite instructors that I worked with, his name is Ron Mita. He taught a class over in Valencia. And he wrote SWAT, and then I think he sold some stuff. He developed robots for Blue Sky or something. Really good guy, very practical, great writer, very cool guy. He's amazing for pitching as well. And he was the one that introduced me to this idea of just 24 plot points. And he said, literally just write down 24 numbers and just put PP, plot point, plot point, plot point. And then break it down into, the first act. And then, most people say first, second, and third, but everybody divides it at the midpoint. Now, it really comes down to how do you define an act? And in researching, when I was working on the videos, I was trying to come up with a good definition for act. And, I looked at Robert McKee, Truby, Trottier, a lot of the greats, and I couldn't find a very clear, specific definition of an act. So, I'm ridiculously pedantic, so I really tried to come down to this, boil it down to its essence. I try to be as precise as I can with the terms and definitions. Like, for example, inciting incident. That term's always bothered me, just because technically every single sequence has an inciting incident, has an incident that's inciting the next behavior. Snyder will refer to as the catalyst. A catalyst is where you take two elements, a chemical reaction that's already going to happen, and a catalyst speeds it up. So what you're saying is that the catalyst is going to take something that's inevitable and enhances it. That's why I call it the impetus. An impetus is a force that moves, that motivates movement. And which is a very specific thing that happens once in the screenplay. So that's my terminology that I use. I think whatever metaphor helps people make sense of the story and take out the essential elements, that's fine. So Ron Mita's approach was basically put the 24 plot points. Plot point 6 is end of act 1. Plot point 12 is the midpoint. Plot point 18 is your low point. And then plot point, I think it was 21 is your climax. And then after that, it's falling action. Very simple. And it's like we would literally just sit there and plot out a story in an hour. And it's super pragmatic. So from there, it really came down to trying to understand, all right, if we keep dividing everything in midpoint, like Pilar, for example, she'll use act 2A and 2B. And it kept on begging this question, what is an act? So in your mind, what is an act? How would you define one?
What is an act? Okay, yeah. Well, it's not really a scene, but it sets you up for one part of the journey.
Okay.
So let's just say there's a story of someone going to college, and maybe they're a fish out of water, and they get a scholarship, and they don't really belong in this world. Mm-hmm. And so the first act or the second act, let's say the second act, would show them arriving with their stuff at the campus and knowing how they're out of place, knowing how they're not going to fit in with the culture. And so you see them kind of scared with their box of stuff, maybe being brushed aside by busy people. Mm-hmm. And so that's establishing the world of that college, and they don't feel like they fit in, and they kind of know they don't, and everybody else knows they don't fit in either. But somehow they've been able to go there. So that's a long-winded way of setting up. Maybe that would be the second act. I don't know. Maybe I'm jumping ahead too much. But
no, I mean, I think you just described 2 acts, right?
Okay.
So
where would you divide it?
That's the big question. And when everybody, there's people like David Franzoni. He came to CalArts, gave one of my favorite lectures on story ever, and he's like, fuck 3-act structure. There's no such thing as acts. You just understand story, you get into character, and you throw conflict at them, and they pursue their objectives. And don't worry about acts. And that's fine. If that works for you, that's awesome. To me, all of it's modular. All of it is use it as assets that help you write, and anything that's holding you back from writing, let it go. It has this kind of, to me, I like to understand things as thoroughly as I can. I learn very slowly and thoroughly, and then let go whenever the story needs to take its own direction. So the way I look at an act is essentially defined by strategies. So a character, the first act is a character has a specific strategy, which is their normal daily life. This is the value systems that have gotten them to this point in life. So when the impetus comes in and throws their life out of balance, they find suddenly that they start to negotiate it and try and be like, well, I don't want to change my life. I don't want to do anything. But the second they cross that threshold and begin to shift into a new strategy, then they've crossed into a new act. So what I've found every single time is that Act 2, for example, you usually have a character that's trying something new, like Tootsie.
How did you know I watched that as a kid?
Oh God, it's so great. Pollock is brilliant. So you have Michael Dorsey, who's dressed as Dorothy Michaels, and he's having success, and everything he's doing is bringing him more and more success, and it looks like, hey, this new strategy is working. Before that, his strategy was, I'm going to be a difficult actor until no one will work with him. So he hits his breaking point. All right, I'm going to dress as a woman and commit completely to the role. And he sees nothing but success until he hit the midpoint, when everything that he's doing feels like it's paying off, but ultimately betrays his authenticity. So it's at the midpoint where basically you feel like you're getting everything you want, and this is completely subjective to the needs of the story. This is just generally how the structure tends to go. But when you hit the midpoint, often you learn that you are as far away from your original objective as you could be, thinking that you're just about to achieve it, generally speaking. Mm. And that realization, whatever that is, the introduction of a new conflict or something like that, creates a kind of shift in strategy. And usually that strategy is very frantic and coping. And so all the value systems that had informed that earlier strategy of, hey, everything's gonna work, you hit the midpoint and it's failing, and you just come tumbling down the mountain until you get down to the low point. Because the first two acts are all about setup, and then the second two are all about payoff. So that third, what I define as an act, what is 2B, but I just call it Act 3, it's easier that way, is really just a strategy of collapsing down the hill until you get to the low point. So all of those choices are paying off, but for the bad.
Where do you think a lot of new writers kind of, not go wrong, but have trouble with the line in terms of maybe 2 and 3?
The line?
When sort of that moment where you think that they're going to achieve this payoff that they came to see the movie for, but that's the beginning of a new set of issues, and now it's going to take you in a brand new direction. Where do you think a lot of writers have trouble when it comes to, is it setting up the first act? Is it where it's not compelling enough, or it's too much drama in the first act and we need a little bit of a build?
We'd almost have to take that a case-by-case scenario. Generally speaking, I'm not really sure where so many people hit the same problems. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it comes down to, generally speaking, yeah, if you're paying attention, if you've invested, the most important thing is if you've invested in a character and you care about what the character wants, you understand what the character wants, and you understand what's at stake if they don't get it, you're free to do anything you want. You can play with structure, throw away structure altogether, as long as you have that, like Sorkin says, worshiping it at the altar of intent and conflict. Is that it? Yeah, I should get my quotes down a little better. But it really comes down to understanding the nature of character. Every scene has to have a kind of emotional motivation. And if it's not emotional, then we're going to disengage. It's not just conflict. It should be conflict that's increasing as we're going along. So, I mean, I see a lot of television and movie. I mean, right now is a great time for writers. There's so much good writing. There's so much really strong writing. A lot of it comes down to pacing. A lot of it comes down to really making sure that the audience is with the main character and that their choices are making sense, and that you care about how this is going to affect the way they're moving forward. But I think if you're tracking that, and most writers, we're delving into ourselves to try and pull out this meaning. A lot of it, like for example, working with producers, most of the notes that I'll get tend to be kind of, just tracking, like, does it make sense that this character would do this at this time, And it's about trying to project and project yourself into the character and understand the intentions and if that's consistent with your overall character profile.